The day I realized everything was a lie still burns in my memory. Not like a scar, more like an open wound that transformed into unexpected strength. I was standing in our Manhattan penthouse, barefoot on the Italian marble I'd selected during our trip to Florence. The floor-to-ceiling windows framed the sunset over Central Park, painting our home in amber and gold. A fitting backdrop for the moment my world shattered. My husband, Elijah, didn't know I was home. He'd been growing careless lately, leaving his office door ajar, speaking too loudly on calls he thought I couldn't hear. Something had shifted in him over our 3 years of marriage. The attentiveness faded. The passionate glances cooled. The way he used to trace my jawline with his fingertips. Gone. I'd dismissed it as the natural evolution of marriage. We were busy people. I was running my grandfather's legacy, Hartwell Innovations, a tech empire valued at nearly $8 billion. Being a female CEO in that world consumed my energy. Meanwhile, Elijah managed his investment portfolio and charity foundation. At least, that's what I thought he did. That evening, I returned early from a board meeting. Our penthouse was silent except for Elijah's voice filtering from his study. I was about to announce my presence when I heard my name. "Charlotte won't suspect a thing," he said, his voice laced with a coldness I'd never heard before. "The amendments to her will are signed. When the time comes, everything transfers to me. No family left to contest it." A pause. Someone on the other end speaking. "No, listen. Her grandfather's succession plan specifically stated the company stays with blood relatives. But since she's the last Hartwell and we're married?" A chuckle. "The board already loves me. I've made sure of that." Another pause. "How long?" "I don't know. Her health issues give us options. Increased medication? Stress? Accidents happen to busy executives all the time." I froze, my hand clasped over my mouth to silence the gasp threatening to escape. My heart hammered against my ribs with such force I feared he might hear it. "Look, it's been 3 years of this charade. Playing the doting husband, listening to her drone on about her day, pretending her charity work matters. Do you know how exhausting it is to sleep next to someone you can barely tolerate?" My knees weakened. I steadied myself against the wall, knuckles white. "Of course I've covered my tracks. The prenup has loopholes. I made sure of that before I even proposed. Remember that weekend I surprised her in Paris? I was actually meeting with legal consultants." Paris. Our engagement. He'd gotten down on one knee at sunset on the Pont des Arts. I'd thought it was the most romantic moment of my life. "Listen, Vanessa, once this is done, we'll have everything we planned. The house in Malibu, the yacht, all of it." Vanessa. The name hit me like a physical blow. His executive assistant. The woman who sent me flowers on my birthday with a card signed "From Elijah with Love." The one who helped him select my Christmas gifts. I must have made a sound because suddenly, Elijah went silent. Then, "I have to go. I'll call you later." I could have confronted him then. Stormed in, screamed, thrown things, all the predictable reactions. Instead, something inside me went perfectly, terrifyingly calm. I quietly walked back toward the elevator, pressed the button, and let the doors close loudly enough for him to hear. Then I called out, "Elijah, I'm home early." When he emerged from his office, he was all smiles and warm embraces. His cologne, the one I'd given him for our anniversary, enveloped me as he kissed my cheek. His hands, the same hands that had just gesticulated while discussing my eventual demise, now caressed my shoulders with fabricated tenderness. "How was your meeting, darling?" he asked, his blue eyes, the eyes I once thought reflected the ocean where we first met, now seemed as shallow as a puddle. "Enlightening," I replied, my voice steady despite the hurricane raging inside me. "Truly eye-opening." He smiled, oblivious to the double meaning. "That's wonderful. I've ordered dinner from that Italian place you love." The irony wasn't lost on me. He was ordering my favorite meal while planning my funeral. "Perfect," I whispered, matching his performance with one of my own. "I'm just going to freshen up." In our master bathroom, I stared at my reflection. My grandfather's words echoed in my mind. "Charlotte, in business and in life, never let them see you bleed." Harold Hartwell had built an empire from nothing, survived corporate takeovers and betrayals. He'd raised me after my parents' plane crash, taught me that vulnerability was private, but strategy was everything. I studied my face, high cheekbones inherited from my mother, determination in my eyes from my father, and the calculating intelligence that was purely grandfather. I wasn't just a Hartwell by name. It was in my DNA. In that moment, looking at myself, I made a decision. Elijah thought he was playing chess, but he didn't realize he was moving pieces on my board. I splashed cold water on my face, reapplied my lipstick, Crimson Victory, my signature shade, and walked back out to dine with the man who planned to kill me. "Everything okay?" he asked, opening a bottle of my favorite Bordeaux. I smiled, raising my glass in a toast. "To revelations," I said. He clinked his glass against mine, confusion momentarily clouding his features before his mask slipped back into place. "To us," he countered. "Yes," I agreed, sipping the wine slowly, savoring both its rich notes and the knowledge he couldn't see coming. "To what we truly deserve." The next 3 months were a masterclass in deception, not his, but mine. Every morning I woke beside Elijah, studying the profile of the man who wore love like a costume. I'd brush my lips against his cheek, whisper, "I love you," and swallow the bitter taste of those words. At night, I'd listen to his breathing, wondering at what point in our relationship the genuine had become counterfeit. Was it ever real? Had he targeted me from the beginning? The Hartwell heiress, newly emerged from mourning my grandfather, vulnerable in my new role as CEO? I remembered our first meeting at the charity gala. I'd been overwhelmed, drowning in responsibilities I felt unprepared for. Elijah appeared like salvation in a tailored suit, attentive, knowledgeable about my company, passionate about similar causes. Now I understood it had been reconnaissance, not coincidence. "You look beautiful today," he'd say over breakfast, his eyes never quite reaching mine as he scrolled through his phone. I'd thank him, wondering if he was texting Vanessa right in front of me. "Will you be late tonight?" became his favorite question. Now I recognized it for what it was, scheduling his freedom around my absence. During board meetings, I started noticing things I'd been blind to before. How Elijah had ingratiated himself with key members. How he'd suggested replacements for retiring executives, people who now looked to him more than me. The subtle way he would interject during my presentations, not quite undermining but positioning himself as the steadier hand. "What would your grandfather think of this direction?" he asked publicly during one meeting, knowing full well how that question would sting. Harold Hartwell's legacy was my North Star. Questioning my stewardship of it was calculated cruelty. The board members shifted uncomfortably. I felt their confidence in me waver. "My grandfather," I responded, maintaining eye contact with my husband, "taught me to recognize snakes in the garden. Don't worry, I haven't forgotten that lesson." Confusion flashed across his face before he recovered with a charming laugh. "Always the sharp one, my wife." At home, the performance continued. He'd bring me tea when I had a headache, tea I never drank after overhearing his call. He'd suggest vacations to remote locations, adventures with risky activities. Each suggestion now carried ominous undertones. "You work too hard," he'd say, massaging my shoulders as I reviewed company reports. "You need to relax more. Your health should come first." My health issues that he'd mentioned on the phone were merely the occasional migraine and the anxiety I'd confided in him about during our first year of marriage. Now he amplified every symptom, suggesting doctors, medications. "I've scheduled you an appointment with Dr. Mercer," he announced one evening. "He specializes in stress management and has some innovative approaches." I later discovered Dr. Mercer had lost his license in 2 states for ethical violations. The final confirmation came when I found the life insurance policy, $5 million, taken out without my knowledge, with him as the sole beneficiary. The paperwork was hidden in a locked drawer in his study, a drawer I shouldn't have been able to open, except I'd had a locksmith make me a copy of every key in our home while Elijah was on a business trip to Boston. A trip where Vanessa had coincidentally been absent from the office as well. That night, as we prepared for a gala, I watched him adjust his bow tie in the mirror. How handsome he was, as if the devil needed good looks to sell damnation. Charlotte, he said, catching my reflection behind him. You're staring. Just admiring what's mine, I replied, the words ash in my mouth. At the gala, I observed him working the room. The easy laughter, the strategic conversations with influential people, the occasional protective hand at the small of my back when others could see. And then there was Vanessa, stunning in emerald green, maintaining professional distance yet communicating volumes through brief glances. I excused myself to the powder room, where I found her touching up her lipstick. Beautiful event, she said, her smile not reaching her eyes. Elijah really pulled out all the stops on the planning. Did he? I asked innocently. I thought you managed most of the details. Oh, well, yes, the execution. She backpedaled. But the vision was all his. He's quite remarkable that way. Indeed. So attentive to what matters to him. Our eyes met in the mirror. A moment of tension stretched between us. He speaks very highly of you, she offered, dropping her lipstick into her clutch. Funny, I replied, smoothing my dress. He hardly speaks of you at all. I left her there, color rising to her cheeks. Back in the ballroom, I found Elijah in conversation with James Porter, our chief legal counsel. James looked uncomfortable, nodding stiffly as my husband spoke animatedly. Everything all right? I asked, slipping my arm through James's. Elijah was just suggesting some updates to the company succession protocols, James said carefully. Given your health concerns, I felt Elijah's hand press against my back, a gesture that once felt protective now registered as possessive. My health is excellent, I countered, smiling brilliantly, though I appreciate everyone's concern. Later that night, as we rode home in silence, I gazed out at the city lights. All those buildings, all those lives, all those stories of betrayal playing out behind lit windows. Was I truly alone in this? Or was this the most common story never honestly told? I gave everything to him, I thought, as I watched his reflection in the car window. My trust, my love, my vulnerability. And he packaged it all as an investment toward my destruction. Elijah reached for my hand in the darkness. I let him take it, his warm fingers interlacing with mine. How strange that the touch that once thrilled me now made my skin crawl. How terrible that I could still remember loving him while planning his downfall. You seem distant tonight, he murmured. Just tired, I answered, squeezing his hand with false affection. I'm exactly where I need to be. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. Mine would be glacial. The morning after the gala, I began implementing what I privately called Operation Glass House. If Elijah thought he could shatter my world, I would make sure he was standing on brittle ice when it happened. First, I needed allies, but trust had become a luxury I couldn't afford. Instead, I created compartmentalized relationships where each person knew only their piece of the puzzle. I started with Diane, my grandfather's former executive assistant who had retired shortly after my marriage, a retirement I now suspected Elijah had orchestrated. Charlotte Hartwell, she said when I appeared at her Connecticut cottage, surprise evident in her voice. What brings the Queen of Tech to my humble abode? I need your discretion and your memory, I replied, accepting the tea she offered. And I need to know why you really left. Her shoulders straightened. He said you wanted fresh blood, younger energy. I didn't believe it, but when the severance package came with your signature, a signature I never authorized, I said quietly. Understanding dawned in her eyes. Without another word, she retrieved a leather-bound journal from her bookshelf. I've kept records of everything that seemed off. Your grandfather taught me well. The journal contained dates, conversations, discrepancies in company documents, all pointing to systematic undermining of my authority, orchestrated by my husband. He's been planting his people throughout the company, Diane explained, creating a shadow leadership loyal to him. Then we'll need our own shadows, I replied. I enlisted James Porter next, the legal counsel who had looked so uncomfortable at the gala. I invited him to lunch at an obscure restaurant where Elijah would never appear. I need to know what my husband has been discussing with you, I said after we ordered. James fidgeted with his napkin. Client confidentiality doesn't apply when the client is committing fraud, I interrupted. Or when the company counsel's primary duty is to the company, not individual executives. His face paled. He's been pushing for amendments to your grandfather's succession plan, creating contingencies in case you become incapacitated. And what did you tell him? That such changes require board approval. That's when he started cultivating board relationships. I nodded. James, I need you to continue appearing receptive to his ideas. Document everything. Can you do that without raising suspicion? The hesitation in his eyes was brief but noticeable. What exactly are we dealing with here, Charlotte? A hostile takeover, I replied, of the most personal kind. With Diane reconstructing the paper trail of Elijah's manipulations and James monitoring his current moves, I turned to the most delicate part of my plan, Vanessa. Rather than confront her, I studied her. I learned her routines, her weaknesses, her motivations. Unlike Elijah, who saw only what he could gain from me, I saw Vanessa clearly. Ambitious, insecure, desperate for validation. I arranged for her to overhear a conversation where I mentioned promoting her to a European office, getting her out of my hair, as I put it to a colleague who was in on my plan. The seed planted, I watched it grow as she began making subtle mistakes in her eagerness to prove herself indispensable to Elijah. Meanwhile, I created a false vulnerability. I began confiding in Elijah about increased anxiety, allowing him to think his suggestions were working. I accepted the appointments with his recommended doctors, but saw my own physicians in secret, documenting every suspicious prescription and recommendation the questionable doctors provided. I made a show of updating my will, with the amendments he'd manipulated me into signing. What he didn't know was that I'd created a secondary will with my personal attorney, one that would invalidate the first if any suspicious circumstances surrounded my death. The most challenging aspect was maintaining the pretense of our marriage. Each kiss, each dinner conversation, each night beside him required Oscar-worthy performance. I laughed at his jokes, accepted his advice, leaned on him at social functions, all while systematically disconnecting our financial entanglements. "You seem different lately," he commented one evening as we prepared for bed. "More relaxed." I smiled, applying the night cream he'd given me for my birthday. A cream I'd discovered contained ingredients that could trigger my skin allergies. "I think the new medication is helping. You were right about Dr. Mercer." His smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'm glad. I just want what's best for you." "I know you do," I replied, watching him through the mirror. "You always have my best interests at heart." 6 months into my plan, I discovered something unexpected while reviewing old company records with Diane. A pattern of investments Elijah had guided the company toward, all connecting back to shell corporations that, when unraveled, led to a single source: Elijah's former business partner, Marcus Reed. The same Marcus Reed who had allegedly died in a boating accident 2 years before I met Elijah. "He's alive," I whispered, connecting the final dots. "And they've been working together this entire time." The realization transformed my understanding of the trap I was in. This wasn't just about my fortune or the company. This was an elaborate scheme years in the making. I hired a private investigator who specialized in finding people who didn't want to be found. 3 weeks later, I received a file containing photographs of Marcus Reed very much alive, residing in a private compound in Argentina. And beside him in several photos, Vanessa. The puzzle assembled itself before my eyes. Marcus, the financial genius. Elijah, the charismatic frontman. Vanessa, the inside operative. And I was merely the vault they needed the combination to. That night, I stood on our penthouse balcony, looking out at the city that had witnessed my family's rise over generations, the empire my grandfather built, that my parents had expanded, that now rested in my hands. "Beautiful view," Elijah said, joining me with 2 glasses of champagne. "What are we celebrating?" I accepted the glass, noting how careful he was to hand me the one from his left hand. "The future," I said, pretending to sip, "and the past that shapes it." "Poetic," he remarked, drinking deeply from his own glass. "You seem contemplative tonight." "Just thinking about legacy," I replied, and what people truly leave behind when they're gone. He had no idea how prophetic those words would soon become. The annual Hartwell Foundation Gala provided the perfect stage for the final act. For generations, my family had used this event to announce major initiatives and company directions. This year would be no different, except everything would change. I spent weeks ensuring every detail was perfect. The venue, my grandfather's favorite museum, the guest list, carefully curated to include key players in my industry, the entire board, media representatives, and most importantly, people Elijah didn't know I knew. As I dressed that evening in a gown of midnight blue, my grandfather's favorite color, Elijah watched me with appreciative eyes. "You're stunning tonight," he said, adjusting his cufflinks, platinum with sapphire insets, a gift from me on our first anniversary. "Ready to dazzle the board?" "More than ready," I replied, securing diamond earrings that had belonged to my grandmother. "Tonight feels significant?" His smile flickered with something I now recognized as calculation. "Every year you say that. This year I mean it." At the gala, I played my role flawlessly. The gracious hostess, the committed CEO, the adoring wife. I watched Elijah work the room, confirming board members' support, laughing with key investors, his hand possessively at the small of my back whenever cameras pointed our way. Vanessa arrived looking nervous, her eyes darting between Elijah and me. I'd ensured her invitation after accidentally seeing text messages on Elijah's phone about her attendance being crucial. Little did they know I'd wanted her there all along. At precisely 9 o'clock, I took the stage for my annual address. Elijah stood in his usual spot near the front, champagne in hand, expression attentive and supportive. "Good evening," I began, surveying the room filled with elegantly dressed power players. The Hartwell Foundation has always been about legacy, about creating something that outlasts us all. The room quieted, attention focused on me. My grandfather used to say that true wealth isn't measured in dollars but in impact, in the changes we create that can't be undone, in the truth we bring to light that can't be buried again. I noticed Elijah shifting slightly, a barely perceptible furrow appearing between his brows. "Tonight, I'm announcing several changes to Hartwell Innovations and the Foundation, changes that honor that legacy of impact and truth." I smiled directly at my husband. "First, I'm pleased to announce our acquisition of Reed Technologies, a company presumed defunct after the disappearance of its founder, Marcus Reed." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Elijah's glass halted halfway to his lips. An extensive investigation revealed Reed Technologies has been operating through shell corporations for years. Tonight we're bringing it into the light, and under the Hartwell umbrella. I gestured to the side entrance where 2 security officers escorted in a man many thought dead. Marcus Reed looked older than his photos, his expression thunderous as he surveyed the room. "Mr. Reed has agreed to cooperate fully with federal authorities regarding certain financial irregularities in exchange for considerations in his case." Elijah's face had gone from confused to ashen. He began moving toward the exit, only to find his path blocked by more security personnel. "Additionally," I continued, my voice steady despite my racing heart, "I'm announcing a restructuring of our executive team and board, effective immediately." Large screens around the ballroom illuminated with documents, emails, bank transfers, all meticulously organized evidence of the conspiracy against me and the company. For those just catching up, what you're seeing is evidence of an elaborate attempt to defraud Hartwell Innovations and its shareholders, an attempt orchestrated by individuals I trusted most. Cameras flashed. Board members gasped. Vanessa made a dash for the door but was intercepted by hotel security. "Elijah," I said, addressing him directly now, "perhaps you'd like to explain to our guests why you've been systematically positioning yourself to take control of Hartwell Innovations in the event of my untimely and planned demise?" The room erupted in shocked exclamations. Elijah's handsome face contorted with rage before smoothing into practiced charm. "Charlotte, darling," he called out, arms spread placatingly, "you're unwell. The stress of discovering my husband has been slowly poisoning me," I interrupted, my voice cutting through his like a blade. "Or the stress of learning the medications your doctors prescribed contain compounds that would eventually cause organ failure?" That kind of stress? James Porter stepped forward, accompanied by two FBI agents. Mr. Hartwell Brooks, we have some questions regarding certain financial transactions and insurance policies. This is ridiculous, Elijah sputtered, looking around wildly for allies. Charlotte is clearly experiencing paranoid delusions. Ask anyone, she's been increasingly unstable. Actually, came a familiar voice from the crowd, she's been remarkably lucid. Dr. Elizabeth Chen, my actual physician for the past decade, stepped forward. I've been monitoring Charlotte's health weekly. Tests confirm deliberate heavy metal poisoning, consistent with compounds found in products specifically provided to her by her husband. The evidence continued mounting as James presented document after document, the falsified will, the life insurance policies, the systematic replacement of loyal executives with Elijah's people. Through it all, I remained composed on stage, watching the man who had planned to bury me being buried instead by his own actions. When security finally led Elijah away, he locked eyes with me one last time. "You won't win this," he hissed. "You're nothing without me." I stepped close enough for only him to hear. "I was everything before you, and now you're nothing without me." As the gala dissolved into chaotic conversation and media frenzy, I retreated to a private room where Diane waited. "Your grandfather would be proud," she said, handing me a glass of water. "He taught me well," I replied, finally allowing my hands to tremble slightly. "Never sign what you haven't read. Never trust what you haven't verified. And never, ever let them see you coming." Outside, I could hear the commotion as guests departed. Reporters shouted questions, and the authorities secured evidence. My world had just imploded publicly, but unlike the destruction Elijah had planned for me, this was a controlled demolition, one that would clear the ground for rebuilding. My phone buzzed with an incoming text from James. "All secured. He's in custody. The board is in shock, but solidly behind you." I closed my eyes briefly, exhaling 3 years of fear and performance. When I opened them again, I was ready for what came next. 1 year later, I stood at the window of my new office, 30 floors down from the penthouse I'd once shared with Elijah. I'd sold the penthouse, unable to sleep there after everything. Some ghosts can't be exorcised, they can only be left behind. The criminal trials had concluded 3 months earlier. Elijah, Marcus, and Vanessa all received substantial sentences for conspiracy, fraud, attempted murder, and a host of financial crimes. The business press had called it the Hartwell Deception, a splashy name for what was, at its core, a painfully ordinary story. Someone pretending to love you while plotting your destruction. I traced my reflection in the glass. I looked different now, stronger in some ways, more cautious in others. My hair was shorter, a physical manifestation of cutting away the past. The company had survived the scandal and, under my recalibrated leadership, was thriving. "Ms. Hartwell?" My new assistant's voice came through the intercom. "Your 2 o'clock is here. Send her in," I replied. The door opened to reveal a young woman clutching a portfolio, her expression a mixture of determination and anxiety. She reminded me of myself at 25, before Elijah, before the betrayal, when ambition burned clean. "Rebecca Wilson," she introduced herself, extending her hand. "Thank you for meeting with me. Your proposal impressed the selection committee." I gestured for her to sit. "A mentorship program for women entering tech after career disruptions is exactly the kind of initiative the foundation should support." Her eyes widened slightly. "You read my proposal personally?" "I read all the finalists' proposals," I confirmed. "Yours spoke to something important, the way women's careers can be derailed by circumstances beyond their control. The way coming back requires not just skill, but courage." We discussed her ideas for nearly an hour. Her passion reminded me why I'd fought so hard to keep control of my company. It wasn't just about money or power, or even my grandfather's legacy. It was about the ability to make meaningful impact. After she left, I checked my calendar. Dinner with James Porter and his wife was scheduled for that evening. Our relationship had evolved from professional to friendly in the aftermath of everything. He'd stood by me during the trials, helped rebuild the company's legal framework, and never once said, "I told you so," about my marriage. Friendship had been difficult for me after Elijah. Trust, even more so. But slowly, I was learning to let people in again. With proper vetting, of course. The walls I'd built were now more like careful gates, still protective, but permeable when appropriate. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister. Not biological, but the family I'd chosen. Maria had been my roommate in college before life took us in different directions. After the scandal broke, she'd shown up at my door with a suitcase and declared she was staying until I was okay. That was 11 months ago. Some temporary arrangements become permanent in the best possible ways. "Don't forget we have tickets to the symphony tonight," her message read. "Wear something fabulous. Living well is the best revenge." I smiled, typing back, "Already planned." And we've moved beyond revenge to rebuilding. As evening approached, I completed one final task, signing the documents establishing the Hartwell Resilience Fund, a resource for victims of intimate partner financial abuse and exploitation. The irony wasn't lost on me that Elijah's attempts to destroy me had instead created something that would help others survive similar situations. Before leaving, I opened my desk drawer and removed the only photograph of Elijah I'd kept. Our wedding day, both of us smiling at the camera, his arm around my waist. I studied it one last time, searching for signs I should have seen, clues I missed. There were none. That was the terrible truth about sophisticated deception. Sometimes the red flags are only visible in retrospect. I dropped the photo into the shredder, listening to the mechanical whir as it destroyed the last physical reminder of those years. Outside, the city glowed in early evening light. I hailed a taxi, giving the driver the address of the restaurant where James and his wife were waiting. As we pulled into traffic, I caught my reflection in the window. Composed, purposeful, scarred but intact. My grandfather once told me that every Hartwell generation faces a defining crisis that either breaks them or becomes their legacy. Elijah had intended to be my destruction. Instead, he became the forge that refined me. I am Charlotte Hartwell. Last of my line, perhaps, but certainly not the end of my story. He pretended to love me to inherit my fortune. I left him with nothing but the consequences of his betrayal. And I learned that true wealth was never what he coveted, but what he could never take from me. The strength to rebuild.